Okay, we are live. Hello, Alexander. How are you?
I'm very well. As I said, tired looking after my children, but physically very well, except, of course, dismayed by this High Court decision today, which we are going to talk about in the Assange case. A distressing, dismaying judgment. I'm desperately sorry for Stella Morris, Assange's fiancée, who I believe is going to marry him fairly soon. Desperately sorry for his children who parted from their father. And of course, beyond sorry for Assange himself, who now has a very real risk now of being extradited to the US. Or, and this is where I'm going to be careful because I'm not absolutely sure about this, it looks as if there might be a route for further court hearings in Britain. But if so, those could last for years, and he's going to be in detention, presumably, throughout that time. And that is beyond cruel and beyond extraordinary. But we'll go into the details of this. We'll go through all the arguments and the decision that the court has made in detail shortly.
Okay. You're a little blurry, but it'll clear up as we go along, as it always does. But let's just jump right into it, Alexander, because we have a real busy day of news. Well, specifically this one breaking news story with Assange. First, let me welcome everybody to the live stream, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the stream. Thank you for spending your Friday with us as we break down this important news event. And thank you to our awesome moderators. I see that Cosmic Rain is with us. I see Alan Watson is with us. And the great GEC is also helping out to moderate. I think that is everyone that is moderating in the live stream. I don't think I missed anybody there. And to everyone joining us from the locals chat as well. Hello to everyone on our locals stream. And Alexander, we should get right into this one. Welcome, Katerina, to the Duran community. Thank you for joining the community. It's happy to have you here. Alexander, the breaking news is the US won, to put it.
Yeah, the US won, and I've got the judgment in front.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when I woke up this morning, this stream was actually going to be about how the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, how the leaders there have just simply lost their mind. And, we've done some shows on Boris. We're going to do some more on Boris Johnson and the fact that it seems like he's completely just sinking. Obviously, the Australian leadership, well, I think we all know what's going on there. New Zealand, the Prime Minister of New Zealand came out the other day and just said that all of this madness is never going to end. So it's going to go on indefinitely. And Trudeau, well, what can you say about Trudeau except the fact that he just seems to be getting crazier and crazier with each passing day, if that's even possible. But I had to change the live stream title after the breaking news came in. But you know what? It is kind of related to what's happened to Assange, because we look at the players involved. And here we have the United States. We have the UK. You have Australia. And it looks like the US, to no one's surprise, has put pressure on the UK and Australia to lead to this judgment that we now have. I think that goes without a doubt that the US strong-armed the UK and Australia. Not many people talk about Australia in this context, but we can never forget that Assange is an Australian citizen, and Australia has essentially abandoned its own citizen. And I think that says a lot. That's a very, very disturbing fact in all of this. If you can't trust your own embassy in London, if you can't trust your own government for which you are a citizen to protect you, then, I mean, where can you really go? So, Alexander, this is kind of related to the fact that leadership in these countries, you may call them the Five Eyes as well, in these countries, leadership is, it doesn't exist. And even more disturbing is the fact that Boris Johnson and the Australian government and the Canadian government and New Zealand, all these governments, they take orders from the Biden White House. Really? The Biden White House? That's who you're going to take orders from? And of course, we have, real quick, Alexander, we have that they're all jumping on board to boycott the Olympics in China as well. a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics as well. It's so frustrating. It's so shameful, but it's not surprising. Anyway, that's what this live stream was supposed to be. Now we have this news, but you know what? It's all connected. You keep on wanting to jump in, so just go ahead, Alexander. Go ahead, take it over.
Well, the first thing I'm going to say is I completely agree with you. I mean, this is completely connected. Let us be absolutely clear. This judgment that we've been talking about, the one that the High Court has made, and the one which was actually made previously by the district judge in the Westminster Magistrates Court, would never have been made once upon a time by a court in England. I mean, the British never extradited people on political charges. It has been accepted by the court that Assange is wanted on a political charge. And yet they claim to have found a gap in the law which allows them to extradite him. That is astonishing. That is incredible. That is a bizarre violation of British legal traditions going back centuries. And it goes directly to the point that you are making, that Britain, along with all those other countries that you've said, has become completely subservient to the United States in the most extraordinary ways, and in ways that fundamentally now distort the functioning of Britain's once celebrated legal system, the oldest continuously existing legal system in the world. I mean, it is shameful. It is astonishing as a British citizen, as somebody who lives in Britain, who loves his country. I have to say that I'm deeply demoralized and deeply shocked and profoundly shocked by this decision and by the way it's gone. And it is exactly as you said, and the fact that it is the case that the British government is essentially taking its instructions from an administration led by an invisible president, a president who is hardly there, who is, to all intents and purposes, not there. In other words, that it's taking its instructions from an empty suit, which happens to sit in the Oval Office. I mean, that makes this even worse, even more shameful, and even more extraordinary. But we have to do what we must do, which is look at this judgment and try to analyze it and try to understand and make some sense of it. And that's unfortunately the task that now lies before us, because believe it or not, and in some ways distressing though it is to say, this story, this saga of Assange in Britain may not be over. This may not be the last hearing here. Now, the reason I say that is because, first of all, we need to look at the judgment itself and what the High Court decided. Now, there were two aspects to this appeal. The first part of this appeal was that the United States came along. They wanted to criticize the lower court's decision to accept evidence from an expert about Assange's mental health issues. They insisted that Assange was not really ill, that he was faking it, that the whole story of Assange being as ill as the experts say is completely untrue, and that the judge was wrong to listen to those experts. That was never a remotely credible appeal, and the High Court quite properly threw all that part of the appeal out. They said the United States is entirely wrong on that. But then the High Court did something which I find is absolutely astonishing. I mean, I find it jaw-droppingly bizarre. It accepted all these assurances that the Americans have come along, the US government, rather, I should say, has come along and given that, that Assange, if he comes to the United States, he's not going to be sent to a real high security prison. He'll be treated gently and properly there. He might be sent to Australia, the country which, as you rightly say, has completely abandoned him. He might go to Australia and serve his sentence there. And all of these assurances, which, as we discussed in previous programs, are not worth the paper they're written on. And besides, which weren't presented by the United States at the trial before the lower court. And the High Court has come along and has said, and I find this exceptionally bizarre, that the United States, that any foreign government, in fact, is in a position to come along and give assurances like this at any point in the extradition process. Now, that seems to me to be wrong on so many levels as to be absolutely bizarre. What it implies, if you unpack it and think about it, is that an extradition process can never end, because even when extradition is refused, the government that's seeking extradition can simply come along, go on making promise after promise about the way the person is going to be treated in that country if he is extradited there, and they can keep this process going pretty much indefinitely until eventually they get their man. Now, that seems to me outrageous. It seems to be wrong. It seems to me, again, a fundamental violation of British legal traditions. But that is what the High Court has now said. However, they've also offered Assange a possible gateway, but it's a gateway which comes with a poison pill. And now the key paragraph is paragraph 23 of the judgment. And I'm going to read it. And what it says is the following. Those representing Mr. Assange have made clear that if the appeal the United States has brought succeeds, he in turn would seek to appeal pursuant to Section 103 by challenging each of the conclusions adverse to him reached by the judge in the lower court. The position was explained on 11th August 2021 at the oral application for permission to appeal. And in other words, what will now happen, or what the High Court says is going to happen, is that they have, in effect, given Julian Assange the right to bring his own appeal against the judgment of the judge in the lower court, Judge Baritza, the judgment that was made a year ago, arguing all the First Amendment issues, all the issues about whether he endangered sources, all of those things. He's now going to be able to bring that appeal and to argue all of those points before the High Court. And the High Court has said that the acceptance by the High Court of the US's assurances is entirely predicated on the assumption, in effect, that Julian Assange himself loses that appeal, which he is now likely to bring. Now, that might sound good. It might give the impression that they haven't slammed the door on Assange. They haven't said he's definitely going to be extradited to the United States. But what it actually means, what it practically means, is that Julian Assange is trapped in a Kafkaesque legal process. He's now got to bring his own appeal against that judgment that the judge made a year ago. That appeal could be heard in perhaps a year's time, perhaps more plausibly, given how complex it would be, in 2 years' time. There would then presumably be a further appeal, depending on which side won, to the UK Supreme Court. We're looking at perhaps 3 years of litigation. He's going to be in prison through all that time, separated from his wife-to-be and his children, despite not having committed any crime for which he's serving a sentence in Britain. I cannot imagine, I cannot conceive anything more cruel than what we are now going to see happening in Britain, happening in my own country, in Britain, the country of habeas corpus, of the country which developed due process, the country which likes to export its legal system and its the values upon which it's supposed to be based around the world. Well, I hope I've made my feelings clear. I hope I've given some insight as to what's going to happen next.
Why are they still holding him? I mean, seriously, I mean, we all understand why they're holding him, but under law, what is the reason for detaining this man?
Well, I've
Why is he
never
in
really.
prison? How come he isn't out on bail or
I've
just
never
out?
understood.
Because I don't understand, what are the charges that they're holding him on?
Well, I've never understood it at all. Now, you say on bail. I don't see
But
why, up to the
yeah,
date of this hearing, he even needed bail. Bear in mind, when the judge in the lower court, Judge Baritza, last year said that he should not be extradited, what were the reasons for keeping him in prison? The extradition had been refused, and he's not serving a sentence for any crime in Britain. At that point, he should have been freed. And yet, the same judge who said that he should not be extradited decided, I do not know on what legal basis that he should be kept in prison, because he's some kind of a flight risk. A flight risk from what decision? Extradition at that point had been refused. Now, of course, we're in a different situation because the decision of that judge has now been overturned. The High Court says that pending Assange's own appeal, the decision is that he should be extradited. That's what they've said. And given that situation, it looks as if there is an argument for saying that he should be kept in prison because there's been a decision for his extradition. However, we now come back to the bail point. Of course, he should be released on bail. He should be released on bail on medical grounds, if on no others. He should be released on bail because he has family. He has a wife-to-be and 2 children. It is a violation of his right and their right to a private life under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights to keep them separated. Now, I pray that there will be a bail application, and that this time that bail application will be allowed. But given the flow of the judgments, given the direction of travel that there's been in this case, who really believes that that's going to happen? I don't. So he's going to be kept in this high security prison in Belmarsh for 1, 2, 3 years, and then he's either going to be packed off to the United States, or, well, maybe at the end of that process he could be released. But what sort of a man will he be by then? And to be realistic about it, will he even survive that long?
Yeah. I have to take this super chat here from Go Away, which says, just super chatting to dab on the chat and remind them that Assange is guilty and deserves to be in Gitmo. Debate me. And I think that Go Away was also saying that he is a sexual offender, and obviously referring to what happened in Sweden. And I mean, anyway, everyone knows that whatever charges were brought up against him with regards to what happened in Sweden was a complete fiction, a complete hoax. As a matter of fact, that story changed 100 times. We all know that Sweden played a part in all of this as well. So shame on the Swedish government as well. But we know that that whole entire sequence of events in Sweden, which got the ball rolling on this, was completely trumped up. And it's been proven. It's been proven by the person that made those charges that none of what Assange was accused of happened. Alexander, you could
I just
get into the details of all of this.
There's a reference
that Assange is guilty because he is.
Can I just deal first of all?
Can I deal
first of all with the Swedish side, because there's a reference here to charges. There are no charges. There have never been any charges against Assange in Sweden. There have never been at any time any sexual assault charges against Assange in Sweden. What happened was a Swedish prosecutor looked at the case, said there is no case to answer, and then cleared Assange.
And dropped
Then
him.
Assange left the country. A different prosecutor then came in and decided, in what many lawyers, including many lawyers in Sweden, conclude was an abusive process, to reopen the investigation. Now, what that prosecutor then sought was to question Assange as part of that investigation, to decide whether any charges should be brought. That prosecutor disgracefully refused to question Assange in Britain, even though there is ample evidence that has happened many times. The British courts disgracefully said that he should be extradited to Sweden so that he should comply with that investigation there, even though there were no charges against him in Sweden. Eventually, after protracted discussions, the prosecutor did come to Britain and did question Assange about those charges in Britain. Assange published a very powerful affidavit, which you can read on the WikiLeaks website, in which he went through all of the allegations that had been made in Sweden, point by point. And following that, the Swedish prosecutor confirmed that she was closing her investigation and that there would be no charges. Let me reiterate again, there have never been sex assault charges against Assange brought in any country, not in Sweden, not in the United Kingdom, not in Australia, not anywhere. Allegations have been made. One Swedish prosecutor said there was no case to answer. Another Swedish prosecutor reopened the investigation, but then closed it down after Assange had been questioned by her. So let's put all that argument about all those claims to one side. And can I also quickly add and reiterate again that, of course, and I'm absolutely sure about this, that all those claims about Assange having committed sexual offences in Sweden was done for two reasons. One, to destroy his reputation, which it has to a great extent succeeded in doing. And secondly, that, of course, in order to prevent Assange from moving around so that the United States could bring proceedings in order to get him extradited, with the United States, by the way, for many years denying that it was seeking Assange's extradition, but then, of course, bringing extradition charges, the extradition requests, and bringing charges against him the moment he was released. As for saying that Assange is guilty of what precisely? He has not been convicted on the charges that the United States is bringing in any court. There is due process. The only people who are entitled to take a view on that are a jury, if he is ever extradited to the United States, or the courts here once they hear his appeal, assuming he decides to bring it. Now, can I say the weight of legal opinion in the United States, both on the part of liberal lawyers and conservative lawyers, constitutional lawyers, is that Assange's actions were fully legal and covered by the First Amendment of the Constitution. The only ground for arguing that he is not protected, he does not enjoy First Amendment protections if he is extradited to the United States as a journalist, is through an argument that he is not a journalist. And as lots of lawyers, multiple lawyers, have pointed out, given that his actions were those of a journalist, that argument is unsustainable. So on the facts, on the law, he appears to be not guilty as charged.
Yeah. If they find out that he's not a journalist, then we're all screwed.
Absolutely.
Period.
What is a journalist?
Yeah.
I mean, I should say on this issue, by the way, and you know, the best person to talk this over with is Robert Barnes, and I'm going to suggest that, you know, depending on whether Robert is free at all, at some point we should have another program on locals, perhaps, to discuss all of this. But to my understanding, the Supreme Court of the United States, the courts in the United States, have already looked at this question about who is a journalist and who is not. And they have clearly said that it's people who carry out and perform journalistic activities. This attempt to create distinctions between mainstream journalists and others does not exist under the Constitution of the United States. And I would add that in publishing his material, the very material, the charges upon which charges under the Espionage Act have been brought against Assange, in publishing this very same material, Julian Assange worked alongside mainstream media, the New York Times, the Guardian, various newspapers in Europe. They all worked alongside with him. So if he is guilty, then they too presumably are guilty too.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same with Snowden. I mean, Snowden was not the Guardian publishing all of the stuff that Snowden was revealing.
Absolutely.
You know what the difference is? Snowden picked the right country to go to.
I know. The Snowden one, indeed. Yeah, quite true. I mean, the one thing I would say is that, as I understand it, I had looked at Snowden's case, but it's a long time since I did. I don't think Snowden's been charged under the Espionage Act. I think he's been charged with theft and other things. But this is something that I'd have to, go back and research and look at again. This. No,
my point is how the mainstream media, in one case, they work with you, and then the first chance they get, they turn on you.
Exactly. That is exactly right. And of course, the fundamental point, the fundamental principle to understand is that the Espionage Act, which is supposed to be about espionage, is being used here to persecute a journalist. And disgracefully, the British courts are going along with it.
Yeah. Where is Boris Johnson?
Where's
Morrissey? Where's Morrison? Where are all these people?
Well, you described it right at the beginning of this program. They're there doing exactly what the empty suit and the Oval Office tells them.
Yeah. You know what? All this comes the same day when Biden has his democracy summit. His sham of a democracy summit. Did you even know that he had the democracy summit?
Oh, I did, absolutely. I have to say, I haven't commented on that yet, not at least substantively, nor have we. But I mean, I don't know whether it's the sort of thing to treat as a farce or not. I mean, as you absolutely rightly say, I mean, the counterpoint on this of holding a democracy summit at the same time as your government, as you're working hard to persecute and jail a journalist is just astonishing. I mean, it's mind-blowing. A journalist who, by the way, and let's not forget this, exposed your war crimes, because that's what this is all about. I mean, Julian Assange published information which exposed war crimes that the United States military committed in various places, and for which the soldiers and officers who were responsible, they've not been prosecuted. Nor has anybody going up the chain of command. I should say that when I talk about this, I am always sympathetic to the young men and women on the front line. I never particularly want to see them prosecuted. The people who ought to be prosecuted in these sort of cases are not the young men and women who find themselves in these impossible situations in these countries and sometimes flip and do terrible and outrageous things. It's the political leaders and the administrators and the generals who put them in that position when they're carrying out a war of aggression instead of doing what they signed up to do when they joined the US military, which is defend their country.
Yeah. And all of this also comes around the same time that you have, I believe, Canada too. Canada has signed up. Australia has signed up. The UK as well, to all boycott the Olympics in China. Because of what, Alexander? Because of human rights. And because China persecutes its citizens and imprisons journalists. I mean, this whole thing is just such an effing farce. The whole thing is a complete effing farce. It's all optics, PR, and spin.
Well, of course it is. So Mr. Blinken can come along and talk about his values-based diplomacy. Well, we see we see what those values actually amount to. I mean, in some ways, I mean, this is a clarifying event. If it were not for the tragedy that there is faced by one individual and his family, I would say in some ways it was a useful thing, despite the disastrous legal precedent that's been created. But I mean, one can never forget the tragedy of the person at the center of all of this, and of his family, and of his wife to be, and their 2 children.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson and his conservative government are having Christmas parties while they're urging the entire nation to lock down and to just follow the rules, everybody. Social distance, stay in your home. But we're going to have a Christmas party. And is wine and cheese, is that considered a party? Ha ha, he he.
Well, indeed.
The whole thing is just, it's all. I'm going to get to super chats.
It's what you said right at the start of the program. Everything is connected. I mean, all these points, I mean, they're all related to each other. The fact that all these countries do what the US tells them is connected is related to this. The fact that leaders of governments do one thing and impose rules on people to do something else, that's related to this as well. It shows the extent to which democracy and the rule of law does not function properly in the West anymore. I've not given up hope, by the way. I mean, I'm desperately worried and sorry for Julian Assange. The very fact that, that even the High Court seems to be conceding, despite this appalling judgment, that there might be a further appeal, shows that at some deep down level, they're very uneasy and know they know that what they're doing is wrong. At some point, I think this battle is going to be won, not necessarily on Assange, but altogether. I just wonder whether it can be won in Britain or whether it would have to be won in the United States, where there is a far more tough-minded and sophisticated legal culture, and where, of course, there is the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights, and where those things really matter, the First Amendment of the Constitution, and people who are really committed to making it work.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I really believe the fight's going to have to go to the U.S. That's where
the
final showdown is going to take place.
Well,
I guess it's fitting. I guess it's fitting that it goes to the U.S. and we're going to see what happens there in America.
Well, I have to say,
if America delivers the right decision.
Yes, I have to say this, and I'm going to say this now. I've said this before, actually, at a much earlier stage in this process. I do sometimes wonder whether perhaps I'm not sure I would advise Assange to do this. Maybe I wouldn't advise Assange to do this, but I would certainly put the option to him that the legal arguments he's making about rights of journalists, protections under the First Amendment, the right of the people to know, those are the sort of judgments that American courts perhaps might be at some level more willing to work on and understand than British courts are, because of course of the difference in political history between Britain and the United States, and because of the existence of the Constitution and of the Bill of Rights in the United States, and because of the existence of lawyers like Robert Barnes and people like him in the United States who are able to argue these points. I have been told that the Supreme Court, the current Supreme Court, is pretty good on First Amendment issues. That the court there, the justices are open, very open to hearing arguments on First Amendment issues. And I do wonder, I do ask myself whether maybe this Supreme Court, which is conservative, but conservative about the First Amendment as well, might be more receptive to these arguments about Assange and his rights as a journalist than the British courts are. But that's not my decision to make, and one has to respect whatever decision is eventually made.
No, I mean, it has to go to the US. It has to go. So be it.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that by the time he gets there, he's in a fit state to do anything, to be straightforward about it. Because, I mean, by all accounts, when he was, he attended the last hearing by video, and he didn't look like a well man. I mean, the court has accepted that he's got health issues. So the fact that they're putting him through this appalling process, as I said, this Kafkaesque legal process, I mean, it's shocking. It really makes me feel ashamed.
That's the point. That is the point.
Well, many people will say so.
Don't you dare report on what we're doing.
Yeah, no,
or else you're going to go through the same grinder.
The same grinder. I mean, he's already been in prison now for what is it, 2 years, 3 years? I mean, he could be facing
on top of 7-8 years.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, if this process takes its course, even if he wins the appeal to the Supreme, the whole legal process, even if he brings the appeal that his lawyers are apparently thinking of bringing, and he wins in the High Court and then wins in the Supreme Court, well, that's 2 years, I would have thought at the least, that he'd still be in prison until that process was concluded. What kind of state would he be in by that point? I shudder to think.
Yeah. 15, 20 years of his life gone.
Absolutely. A young, vital, a brilliant man, apparently, intellectually brilliant man. I mean, I'm not saying he's without flaw, but, a man with a tremendous, sparkling mind when he went in, and apparently he's a mental and physical wreck now. And does that surprise anyone?
For reporting the news.
That's
the point.
For exposing war crimes.
Exposing war crimes. For exposing war crimes. And going back to your previous point, and I'll get to some super chats, some questions, because we have a lot of questions, Alexander. The fact that the High Court in the UK knows they're doing something wrong and continued to press on and do that wrong is even worse. Well, I would have been happier if you had said they're just a bunch of dummies, or they're just evil people and they like to do wrong, or they're too stupid to know that they're doing a wrong. That would have made things at least justifiable. But the fact that they know that they're doing something terribly wrong and evil, yet they press on doing it, to me, just says everything.
Well,
about the UK judicial system. Says everything.
As I've said already, I feel ashamed. So, I mean, and I'm somebody, who worked in this system for 12 years. So, when I say I feel ashamed at multiple levels. I mean, I think this is to say that this is unjust and unfair. I mean, those are words that just don't remotely convey the kind of feelings that I have. But of course, I live in Britain. I speak here. I am, to some extent, and this is a point I think I have to make, I am constrained by the contempt laws which exist here and which especially apply to someone like me.
Yeah. All right, let's get to some chats, Alexander, some super chat questions. Jay Galt says, reminds me of Pontius Pilate.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said.
Sanjeeva says, courts around the world usually are unforgiving in contempt of court matters. Do you think Assange made it worse by jumping bail?
Yes, he did, but it should have been this. This is not an argument about that. He's already served a sentence for it, a 4-year sentence for it. I mean, that should not be held against him now. This is an entirely different issue, and it's if the judges were being influenced by that, then that would be incredibly, astonishingly wrong. As a matter of fact, I don't think they are. I don't think they are. I don't think that's the reason they've made this decision. I think the reason they've made this decision is not because he jumped bail. It is because, frankly, they're intimidated by the power of the United States.
All right. From locals, you have Shifu is saying trying to win a legal war for Assange is already going down the wrong track. This is and always was a class war, the political class versus the masses. And Shifu also says the witch from New Zealand drew the distinction, calling it accredited media. Excellent point there. And yeah, excellent point. And they do that on purpose, by the way. They know what they're up to when they say accredited media. And Leafy Bug says, would it be strategically sound for Assange to allow himself to be extradited to the US? Certainly the institutional machine there is very powerful, but there are also formidable opposition forces there too. And Degar says, is there still hope? And I agree with that. Assange does have an excellent legal team, from what I understand, that is ready and waiting. And man, they are going to put up a hell of a fight for Assange, a hell of a fight for Assange. And that's why, the final battle should take place in the US. It's fitting because I believe that Americans are going to fight for Assange. I really believe that.
I'm going to say a number of points here. First of all, the legal history, the legal cultural history, the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, all of those things would be working on Assange's side. We don't have anything like that here in Britain. We have a legal tradition, but it's nowhere near as strong in these kind of cases as that in the United States. And that's, I think, an important point to make. And of course, it would give Assange an advantage if he were extradited to the United States, which he doesn't have here. Secondly, you have lawyers in the United States who are much more accustomed to arguing these points, and judges who are much more receptive to them. So you have judges like Robert Barnes, who we do programs with on locals. You've got lawyers like James Goodall, who I had a discussion with on Consortium News. You've got people like that, people of absolutely star caliber, who have an understanding and a feel for this kind of law, which we simply don't have in Britain also. And last but not least, and I think this is perhaps in some ways the saddest thing, there is political activism in the United States around these sort of issues, and organized political activity and engagement to an extent that just doesn't exist in Britain anymore. When I think it's Shifu Ugitsi said that this is something where you need to have the masses organized. In Britain, the masses haven't moved. There's no organization to lead them. I mean, I know there's a lot of sympathy amongst a lot of people, particularly people, by the way, lower down the social scale for Assange in Britain. But there are no political forces who would stand up for him, who are able to argue his case, who are prepared to mobilize and to bring out, the tens of thousands that you would need to make a difference. I feel that in the United States, it could be different. There, I think, because of the stronger democratic culture, and I'm not naive. I know that, one shouldn't push this too far, but I still feel that the United States has a stronger democratic tradition in these sort of things, and that Americans, because of the way they've been brought up to respect the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, would be more willing to come out and protest for Assange than the British have been. But for me to say I would advise Assange to go to the United States and fight his case there, well, I can't do that because, first of all, it's not for me to give that kind of advice. And I mean, I know also that there are, particular dangers in doing that. I mean, you come, if you like, very close to entering the den of the beast that is trying to devour you. So to give the advice to do that, I mean, I'd be extremely wary of doing it. I doubt even his lawyers would be prepared to do that. But, I can certainly see the argument for doing it as well. And maybe, you could put it to Assange that perhaps that's a possibility, an option, which he might wish to consider. But I wouldn't put it to him more strongly than that if I was there, if I was speaking to him.
All right. Francis Mayer says sunlight is the best disinfectant. Thank you very much for that super chat. Francis Mayer agreed. Otto M says, ask the January 6th, quote unquote, insurrectionists how the Bill of Rights functions today. Excellent point. That is an excellent point. Alan says, I think the UK government would be glad to get rid of Assange and rid themselves of any responsibility. That's an excellent point as well. The UK would be ecstatic to get rid of Assange and wash their hands of Assange, going back to that Pontius Pilate super chat in the beginning. Can USA says, this is the work of the Five Eyes, although more visible now than it was for many years. This Anglo club is showing new purpose and unity in many ways. The diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics coming up is a clear example. When it comes to the Five Eyes, it is all about the deep state intelligence people, and they really take Assange and WikiLeaks personally. They will stop at nothing to bring him down without mercy. Well said.
I mean, I agree with every one of those points, by the way, and the point about the events in Congress in January of this year and what's happened there is absolutely true. It's completely correct. The only thing I would say is that there's been concerns expressed about it in mainstream media in the United States, or at least conservative mainstream media in the United States, which, believe it or not, that does exist. You don't find anything comparable about Assange here in Britain. So the point is well made. I still lean to the view that there's just more weight to these sort of arguments in the United States than there is in Britain. I mean, to be frank, the idea of Assange bringing an appeal and waiting another 2 years for a decision, I mean, that would fill me with horror if I was in his position.
Yeah. From Raul, WSJ, U.S. inflation likely hit a 39-year high in November. The U.S. has bigger problems than Assange, so nothing will happen to Assange.
Well, so a lot is already happening to Assange, if I can put it like that. He is in prison in Belmarsh. And of course, if he's extradited to the United States, if he finds himself there, to be very clear, there will be another legal process, another legal maze that he will be facing there. Though perhaps a rather more, to be honest, open one than the one in Britain. But I'm not optimistic about this. The point about inflation is very well made. You would have thought that the United States government has more important things to worry about than persecuting a journalist. It gives you a very interesting feel for their priorities, that they're actually taking these steps, these extreme steps, these disproportionate steps against one person. And it tells you how sensitive some people in the United States government feel about the steps he took to expose their war crimes.
No, they have to, because it's all about shutting down free speech. And making sure that no one reports on stuff that happens, on truths and facts. It's all a piece to a much bigger puzzle, taking out Assange, that's for sure. So they have to make sure they take him down. ENS says, I guess that the USA will hand over the wife of the diplomat that killed the young man outside the military base then.
Not quite.
Good point. Well made. Rick says, this is just the UK licking the boot of the USA as it has since World War II. The same UK didn't extradite 2 terrorists involved in the Chechen war back to Russia.
Yes, but
another excellent point.
Absolutely. Once upon a time, we did have more backbone in Britain. I mean, I can remember back in, I think it was the 1970s, when the British refused to extradite a CIA whistleblower. I think his name was AG. I can't AGEE. I can't remember exactly. But I remember the US was very annoyed about that, but the British held their ground and said that, you know, that was their traditions and they wouldn't extradite him on a political charge. Well, that was then, and we see now what happens now. And there has been, I have to say, a decline in self-respect and self-esteem. And coming back to what Alex said about the fact that they secretly must feel angry with themselves and ashamed, I am sure they do. And people who feel angry with themselves take out their anger on others, and they will take it out on their own people.
Yeah. Dr. SS says he did a mistake, should have gone to Russia. He would be better treated there. Australian government did nothing to protect him.
Well,
Exactly.
what I know some people are saying is that he shouldn't have gone to the Ecuadorian embassy. He should have gone to the Russian embassy. Yeah. What I've also heard, however, is that the Russian embassy wasn't keen on him going there. But of course, if he had gone there, he would have been in a stronger position. But then, of course, the story of WikiLeaks being a Russian intelligence catspaw would have gained far more traction than it has done. And I know for a fact that Assange is extremely committed to protecting WikiLeaks' reputation. So if you like, he sacrificed himself to save WikiLeaks.
Yeah. Well, Edward Snowden pulled it off, but he didn't go to the embassy. He went straight to the country. So it's a completely different situation. I'm just saying that
different situation.
You heard the same arguments being made about Snowden, that he's
exactly.
But you know, he eventually
he found
those narratives faded away. So
he found himself in Russia, and he was incredibly lucky that he did, because of course his actual place, the place he wanted to go to, was, if memory serves me rightly, Brazil, or at least somewhere in Latin America. But he wasn't able to go there because the US blocked the air routes. So he was incredibly lucky because he was in Russia. And of course, the Russians were able to grant him asylum when he asked for it, and are able to protect him, which, to be realistic, no other government would.
Yeah, and Putin wasn't happy about it.
No, Putin wasn't happy
about it at all. Yeah, but you know, they had to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
there wasn't much
he
of a
said,
choice.
Putin made it absolutely clear. He said, there's absolutely no way we're going to extradite this man to the United States. Russia does not extradite people on political charges. Once upon a time, neither did Britain. Well, there you go. Tells you in some ways which country is still sovereign and which is not.
Yeah. That's worrisome. You better run, says Pawn in the Game in the super chat. Thank you very much for that super chat. Dr. SS says, as part of the Five Eyes, my country, Australia, has no independent foreign policy. Can't even protect its own citizens. It's really shameful.
Yeah.
Well said. I mean, yeah, Australia they're just a no-show in all of this.
Yeah,
I mean, literally a no-show in all of this.
Well, yes, and of course,
and that's really bad. I mean,
well, it's worse.
It's worse. Yeah.
I mean, it's terrible. I mean, I mean, there's even this famous quote that, you know, it's the fear only the indifferent, because, you know, don't fear your friends because they can only betray you. Don't fear your enemies because they can only kill you. Fear the indifferent because they make treachery and murder possible.
Yeah. Francis Mayer, thank you for that super sticker. Thank you very much for that. Go Away says, okay, fine, Alexander has bested me. Truth is, I don't like Assange because he is from Melbourne and won't lose any sleep if he ends up in prison.
Well,
I mean, if he should be punished in the way he has because he's from Melbourne, but I mean,
well, yeah, I'm not responsible.
Anyway, really. All right. Francis says Alexander's analysis is spot on. We need a televised trial as a condition of extradition.
Yeah. Well, that's another point, because I mean, trials increasingly in Britain are televised, but it's much more widespread in the United States. And I would have thought, by the way, that in Britain, when the appeal comes up, the US will law will seek to prevent the appeal being televised. Anyway, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see. Valies, thank you very much for that super chat. Valies is also in the house moderating, as well as Zarael is in the house, and Reckless Abandon is also here. So we have a good team of moderators helping out with this live stream. Francis's super chat says Boris is worried about his Maxwell association.
I think lots of people in Britain are
They should
worried.
extradite Andrew.
Lots of people are worried in Britain about the Maxwell Association. And of course, in the last couple of days, this photograph has been floating around in the British media of Ghislaine and Epstein together sitting on a bench in the Queen's estate of Balmoral in Scotland, exactly the same seat where the Queen has been photographed sitting. So you can see how embarrassing for the British establishment this affair is potentially.
That's why they want it to go away.
Yeah.
Dr. SS says justice system in Western countries at higher levels are following national interests and do not care about justice.
Well,
that's the danger.
After this judgment, how can I disagree?
That's the danger. Yeah. Moon Dragon says China and Russia getting more ammo to blast the U.S. on its democracy summit. Actually, Maria Zakharova actually made a statement about the Assange verdict. Alexander, did you have a chance to read?
No,
the
I haven't seen it.
She just pretty much just called out their hypocrisy.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
It's an easy goal.
Well, absolutely. But of course, I'm not sure to what extent the United States either understands that or even cares anymore. Because, I mean, the whole democracy summit anyway, I mean, is such a ludicrous absurdity when you see who are the kind of people who are invited to it. I mean, it makes talk about it being a democracy. It's the United States and its friends, or people that it wants to have as friends, that it's inviting to this thing. And they just stick the democracy label on it because they feel they have to do that in order to keep the American people, who do have a genuine commitment to democracy, on side. It's a game that's been played in the United States very cynically for a very, very long time now. And one does sense that more and more people in the US are seeing through it. But of course, there's still a lot who don't.
Yeah, the whole thing's just a sick joke.
Yeah.
Joe Biden having a democracy forum. All right. 81 million votes, the most popular president in history. Makes perfect sense. He also invited Ursula von der Leyen in there to a democracy summit.
The European Commission, exactly. Yeah.
The whole thing's like just
that famous democratically elected institution. Yeah. Which is so accountable to the people of Europe for its various actions. But there we go.
They're just taking a piss at us, Alexander. That's all they're doing, literally. Figuratively, literally. Cosmic Rage says, I agree, Alex. It's hypocritical to boycott the Olympics based on human rights when these countries are freely abusing human rights these days. With the COOF, woke agenda, etc., makes me mad.
Well, indeed, absolutely. Well, can I just say, I mean, for me, this democracy summit, I mean, what it reminds me of, and I'm going to say this straightforwardly, is one of those old Soviet party congresses where, people come along and they talk about, we're building socialism and all of that. And nobody really believes any longer what they're saying. They're all reading from scripts and it's all cliches and slogans being spouted out. And this is what this democracy summit is. And of course, building socialism, and the Soviet Union, it was doing all these things in all kinds of places to all these sorts of people. And it's the United States is behaving in exactly the same way. And it didn't, in the end well for the Soviet Union. Who says it will end any better for the United States?
Dr. SS says, moral of the story, if you want to get political protection, you must always flee to Russia.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. Well, I mean, I gather there was one of the protesters. I called him protesters from the certain event that took place in in January last year in Washington, who's actually fled to Belarus of all places.
Not to Belarus.
Yeah, exactly.
And Belarus is televising it to their people.
Absolutely.
Because why not?
Why not? Yeah.
And the guy seems that he's pretty happy there too. So, what can you say? Kurt Fram says, it is dangerous to be right in matters on which the established authorities are wrong. That's a quote from Voltaire. God bless Assange.
Well, indeed, so true. Absolutely. It's always dangerous to be right before your time. I mean, the history is littered with cases like this. But I mean, in Assange's case, of course, lots and lots of people know that he's right, and that they still do these things to him.
And Kurt also has another quote from Voltaire here as a super chat. It is forbidden to kill, therefore all murderers are punished unless they kill in large numbers and to the sound of trumpets. That's from Voltaire.
Yeah.
Free Assange.
Voltaire was a great man, and Candide is one of the greatest books in European literature and indeed philosophy. It's a profound and wonderful book, and it's a shame, by the way, that we don't hear as much about Voltaire as we used to. Once upon a time, you were always hearing about Voltaire, and it's unsurprisingly, as the powers that be have become more authoritarian, you hear less and less of him.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Where am I here? Anatoly says, how does the US apply political pressure to the UK?
How does it? I'm going to tell you the simplest and most effective way that it's done. The head of the CIA calls the head of MI6. And the implicit warning is, if you don't give us Assange, we will reduce or end intelligence cooperation. I mean, that goes on. I know that kind of pressure goes on all the time. And the British are terrified of it. Because if the US severs intelligence cooperation with Britain, then of course Britain cannot operate an intelligence operation that has global reach in the way that it does, because it relies on US resources and US technology to make it possible. And without a global intelligence operation, Britain loses whatever pretense it has to be a great power. Now, I think actually it's a bluff, because the United States needs Britain's help to conduct its own intelligence operation. But I know that threat is made all the time.
Yeah. Rocky Lux says, in the earlier court case, Assange versus the Swedish prosecution authority, didn't the minority decision regarding the interpretation of the Vienna Convention on the law of treaties become law through Jeremy Corbyn's efforts?
Well, what in fact happened, and I mean, I don't remember all the details of the case to the extent that you say, but what I do remember is that the court in that case ruled against Assange in a way that frankly contradicted the standard interpretation of the law, and that subsequently the law was changed to bring it back in line with the original interpretation of the law, which the court in Assange's case had overruled. I mean, it was very bizarre and very weird, and it showed how profoundly wrong the court's decision in that case had been. Now, if Corbyn himself had had any role in it, I don't remember. I will say this: Corbyn has not distinguished himself over the Assange case. He spoke out for Assange before he became leader of the Labour Party, and he's been speaking out for Assange since he ceased to be leader of the Labour Party. But whilst he was leader of the Labour Party, he was, as always, very intimidated by all the sort of people around him, and he dare not speak out on behalf of Assange practically at all. And that was always the problem with Corbyn. He always pulled his punches. He always allowed his enemies to win the argument with him.
Exactly, and that's why they finally got to him.
Exactly.
Let's see. Alan says that Belmarsh is where terrorists are kept in solitary confinement. And Rocky Lux says, I saw Craig Murray outside the court in the background. Good on him.
Absolutely. I should say Craig Murray is a personal friend of mine. So, just to say that. So anything I say about Craig Murray, I mean, that's a declaration of interest. Craig Murray has just come out of prison in Scotland, where he was jailed for his reporting of a court case involving Alex Salmond. And I'm going to say straight away, I think that was as dangerous a case in some ways as the Assange case is, because the judge in that case, in Craig Murray's case, actually made explicit, she actually said that there is a difference between a mainstream journalist and an independent journalist. The one is a real journalist and the other is not. Now, that is an extraordinary step, and it's, of course, directly relevant to what has happened in the Assange case. Now, as far as I am concerned, that distinction has no basis or foundation in law, either in Britain and certainly not in the United States. And moreover, when the judge made that distinction in Craig Murray's case, she cited no legal authority whatsoever in support for her view. Craig Murray sought to appeal that comment, that judgment, to the Supreme Court, to the British Supreme Court, and the British Supreme Court appallingly, shockingly refused to hear his appeal. I know that Craig Murray's lawyers were stunned and they were in tears apparently about it. They just couldn't believe that the Supreme Court wouldn't rule on a point like that. And that gives you a further sense of how bad things in Britain have become. And it shows you why the High Court is making in Assange's case the sort of decisions it is making.
Okay, from Freeborn JJHW says the English courts should now be held in contempt by us all. Perhaps Runnymede 2.0 will be necessary.
Well, can I just say, if people start talking like that about the courts, if enough people care about the courts and start talking in that way, if there's a sort of critical mass of people who make those kind of criticisms, it has an effect. I worked in the Royal Courts of Justice, and I can say that indisputably, the judges are very, very conscious of what people outside the courtrooms think about them. There's a very famous case in Britain, going back to the early 1970s, the so-called Oz case, where a magazine was prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act, wrongly and inappropriately, in my opinion. And the judge jailed the people in the Oz case, and made comments which appeared to restrict freedom of the media and journalists. And of course, in those days, and we're talking about the 1970s, there was a huge outcry. Lots of people complained. And the High Court, the court itself, found ways of overturning its own judgment, even though it had to take unorthodox steps in order to do it, because it was concerned about the damage that was being done to its reputation. So the court does care about its reputation. And if a critical mass of people said those sort of things, it would have an effect. Problem is, at the moment in Britain, that critical mass of criticism isn't there.
Shady Lady, thank you for your super sticker. Command Unit says Volkov said that Putin will be forced to enforce the jab mandate in Russia because of the low rate. He sounded very happy about it.
Well, I'm sorry, look, I haven't heard this. As you can imagine, I've been up since early morning tracking this Assange case. I mean, it doesn't surprise me, by the way, but I'm not up to date with this information. I mean, also the other thing where Putin is concerned, I've been really tied up with, is the NATO-Ukraine issues and this very high stakes game, well, putting it mildly high stakes game of poker he's playing with Biden at the moment over Ukraine and over NATO. So, I mean, that particular issue, I'm not in any way discounting its importance. It doesn't surprised me what you've just said, but I'm not going to comment on it further because, as I said, until I read the statements and see what exactly was said, I mean, I just don't know. Also, it's always worth waiting to see what Putin is going to say and what he's going to do, rather than rely on what other people say on his behalf, because sometimes the two don't correspond, and that's even true about people in Russia.
Right. Kurt Fromm says, I had a flight booked to Cuba onwards to Latin America, and I was stopped because the United States government decided to revoke my passport.
Yeah,
End quote. That is from Snowden.
Exactly. That's exactly.
He was on his way
correct.
to Cuba.
That's exactly correct. I mean, he did not want to stay in Russia. I mean, just like Assange didn't want to flee to Russia, Snowden also didn't want to flee to Russia, precisely because, as like with Assange, he didn't want to be labeled a Russian agent, but he wasn't able to leave Russia. And he is, by the way, despite the fact that, you know, he found himself in Russia through no desire of his own, you find people who do label him a Russian agent and who make out that because he is in Russia, because he accidentally found himself there against his wishes, that somehow proves that he was working for the Russians all along. And I read so many comments and claims to that effect in the mainstream media, and they always make me angry because they are so completely untrue. But I read so many comments like that, and they still get made. And there are very, very few people in mainstream media who come out and argue them or contradict them.
Yeah. Command Unit says that Volkov is Navalny's organization leader, for context.
Well, there we go. So, I mean, you know, what Volkov says is, he certainly doesn't speak about for Putin. I mean, you know, so, I mean, I wouldn't, in that case, put any weight on this at all.
Yeah. Hunger says one of two. There's a two-part comment here. British action in both East Europe and South China Sea is like a lackey going above and beyond the wishes of its masters. There are no British bases in the US for a reason. Part two says, just as Rhodesia was fervently more pro-British than actual Britain, the UK governments after Suez are fervently more pro-American empire than America itself.
Absolutely. There's a wonderful French comment, a French phrase about being more royalist than the king. And sometimes that's exactly what the British are. And you're absolutely right, by the way. The United States wasn't happy about the British frigate sailing close to the Crimea. And they were extremely unhappy. And in fact, they warned the British against sending their aircraft carrier, which, by the way, has American personnel on it, close to Chinese-controlled islands in the South China Sea. The reason is that the United States doesn't want the British getting into trouble, either with the Russians or with the Chinese, with the United States, with its far more powerful military, then obliged to take steps to rescue the British from whatever mess they've got themselves into. So the British acting in this kind of way doesn't please the US. It irritates them. But that's, you know, geopolitics. On Assange, of course, which is what we've been discussing today, the British have just done exactly what the Americans want them to.
Yeah. Let's see. Chris of Carthage says, I believe future historians will look back on IS global hegemony as a continuation of UK's imperial zenith. And US global hegemony as a continuation of UK's imperial zenith, Anglo-American era of global treachery.
Well, can I just say there is something in this, in the sense that, and I'm now going back into history, that at the end of the 19th and early 20th century, a lot of people in Britain began to understand that Britain no longer had the power by itself to exercise the hegemony that it did. And there was a famous phrase by the then British colonial secretary, a man called Joseph Chamberlain, the father, by the way, of Neville Chamberlain, who was very influential in this field. And he actually said that Britain is a weary titan which is struggling to hold the orb of the earth on its shoulders. It's becoming exhausted. And so what do? They say, well, we can't keep this up much longer. We are going to turn to the country which can, the other English-speaking country, which is the United States. And in the 1890s and 1900s and 1910s, there is a concerted effort by a section of the British establishment to win over the United States to take over this role from Britain. And all kinds of people in the United States were very open to all of that. One of the most important, by the way, in Britain at that time was the American writer Henry James. And it did, in fact, have a great deal of influence. Now, this is a huge topic. We're doing history issues on the Duran. Maybe we will turn eventually to all of this. But it's one of the most interesting discussions that there's ever been. And, Winston Churchill, who was, of course, started in politics in Britain in the late 19th and early 20th century, and who had an American mother. He actually was one of the prime advocates of all of this. And he once wrote a book about the history of the English-speaking peoples, in which he quite openly basically tried to associate the United States in the British imperial destiny and tried to talk of the United States helping Britain or replacing Britain in carrying this burden. So you're absolutely right.
Meganesia Shan says Meganesia is the original name for the greater Australian continent. When Assange was a journalist in Australia, he reported on West Papua, very much part of Meganesia. One war to win.
Didn't know that. Thank you very much,
Thank you for that.
Excellent.
Yeah. Excellent. Super chat. Rifi says journalists must start releasing damning files on the US, UK governments. They must punish, expose whistleblowers on these corrupt governments. Hashtag Assange.
I agree, but they're either too much in bed with those governments, too supportive of those governments, or too scared after what they've seen happen to Assange to do that. That's the danger. That's what this is all about. This case that's been brought against Assange is to scare everybody and to make it impossible to do what he did, which is to expose US government war crimes. And by the way, British government war crimes also.
Yeah. Jay Galt says, could the Ghislaine photo release implicating the Queen be a threat to the British to deliver on Assange?
I never thought of that. To be straightforward,
I'm sure they'll use everything at their disposal.
I think you're right, Alex. I think every tool in the book is being used. I mean, the US, to be straightforward about it, has massive levers of control in Britain. I've got lots of people in Britain who are only too keen anyway to do America's bidding. I mean, there are a lot of British people who within the political establishment who essentially consider themselves or conceive of themselves as part of the neocon neoliberal enterprise, which is located in Washington, headquartered in Washington. And they're going to go bend over backwards to help the US in this kind of case in any way they can.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that do this just so they can get invited to the cool parties, and that's not an exaggeration.
Well, no, it's not an exaggeration. It's not an exaggeration at all. Absolutely. Yeah. I should know. I once had an entry to those parties, and I went the other way. I mean, I know, but I know lots of people who went in the other direction. And by the way, I also know quite a few of them who eventually came to regret it, but the pull is certainly there.
Yeah. Dr. SS says Taliban fought a war for 20 years and did not hand over Osama to the Americans.
Yeah.
How about that? I didn't think about that. That's quite a point.
It's quite a point.
Yeah. My stock market pick says it is better for you to be defeated while speaking the truth than to be victorious through deceit. Sentences of Sextus. Thank you very much.
Well, indeed, very true.
Very well said.
But very well said, yeah.
And let's see. Divine Insurgent says, since you two are of Greek origin, what is your favorite Greek classic or philosophy?
My favorite work of ancient Greek literature is Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War. But if you're talking about Greek philosophical writings, I have to say Plato's early dialogues are, for me, exceptional. I mean, you know, the especially the early ones, up to the point where he starts writing the Republic, which begins to become, I think, particularly difficult. And also, I have to say, some of Aristotle's works are really extraordinary. I mean, they're unbelievably dry and difficult. But having said that, I mean, works like the Politics, for example, are really remarkable, and they are, in a way, the origins, the first works in the West of political theory and constitutional theory, and they are very, very remarkable indeed. To my mind, those two people, Plato and Aristotle, are at the center. They're the two twin pillars of Western thought.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I take a keen interest in learning about, he's not a philosopher, but learning about Alexander the Great.
Well, indeed, yeah.
I
do too.
That's a historical figure
Yeah.
that's just very interesting to learn about.
Yeah, it certainly is.
All of his accomplishments.
Yeah.
The Greeks said Alexander of sound body and sound mind.
They
Greeks were
did.
smart. Yes, they did. Let's see here. Where am I? That's worrisome. You better run says, when the last bastion of freedom is only found in Russia, all hope is lost.
Well, not all hope. Never give up hope. But to say that the situation is dark would be absolutely true. Dark and getting darker. But, you know, there's always a dawn afterwards. Never give up.
And I would say that, you know, when you look at Russia or the United States or the UK, you know, these are countries that when they're pushed to the wall and when you need them to stand up against evil, they do.
They do, exactly.
They come around it. So Russia, not to discount Russia, but Russia has definitely saved the world on many occasions.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I mean, and the US also.
And
the US,
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
as I said, you know, I agree with that actually.
Yeah, the battle shifts to the U.S. most likely. The battle will shift to the U.S. and I think the U.S. will come through in the end. I really believe that.
Yes, I'm going to say something quickly, which is perhaps I shouldn't really say, which is I think he would get a better legal team. He would definitely get a better legal team in the U.S. I'm not criticizing his legal team in Britain, but I think this is an argument that American lawyers are better at making than British lawyers are. It's more their territory than ours.
Yeah, look, and the American legal system, American lawyers, they're going to want to take this up.
Well, absolutely.
Because this is a core fundamental value of American culture is the freedom of speech and the right to speak freely and the right of journalists to report the news.
Exactly.
To the core of what it means to be American. So
exactly.
they're going to fight for this very, very hard.
Exactly. So it carries attraction amongst Americans, which it just doesn't here. I mean, British sentiment is, dare I say, it's too cynical and worldly for this sort of thing. Talk to Americans about these things, and they listen and they act, and that includes American judges, includes American people, but British people, you know, they just are too ironic, if you like, to take this completely seriously, at least in these times.
All right. Zariel says, a comment on U.S. legal system. Momentarily, it is still kind of working, but as older generations pass on, we see that it is we see what is becoming of this country. Look at the 500 plus imprisoned citizens from the DC protests. It's frightening.
Well, this is profoundly true. And if I can just go back to that discussion I had with James Goodall on Consortium News, which you can find there. And I think it's been in other places too. I mean, you can find it there. But James Goodall represented the New York Times when the New York Times was a real newspaper long ago in 1971 in the Pentagon Papers case. And there were quotations from some of the comments made over the course of the Pentagon Papers case by the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Hugo Black. And the way Hugo Black spoke about how liberty, freedom of the media should never be overridden by the glib misuse of security considerations. But I pointed out to Goodall in that discussion that Hugo Black was born in the 1880s. He became a lawyer and was conditioned to believe in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights long before the national security state that we have in the United States and in Britain and all those places came into existence. And that undoubtedly explains in part his judgment, the judgment he gave in 1971, which is almost the last judgment he gave. He died very soon after. The kind of judges you have today, they've lived their lives, all their legal lives, against the backdrop, against the existence of the national security state in the United States and in Britain. So they might not be as caring about these things as Hugo Black used to be way back in 1971. Having said that, I repeat again, I think this is much more in America's DNA than it is in Britain's. And I still feel that in America, this will carry a resonance that it doesn't do in Britain.
Yeah. And Francis Mayer says the people of the US are fine. The duopoly is the big problem.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, very true. And Leafy Bug says, it seems to me that the Australian government is playing the true Pontius Pilate role in this sorry saga. Well said, Leafy
Absolutely.
Bug. And Shifu says, Democracy Summit, more like neoliberalism summit. And then Leafy Bug adds that Saudi Arabia was at the Democracy Summit.
MBS, of course, being the great proponent of democracy,
absolutely,
and the man who has this enormous, solicitous care for journalists.
He's like Jefferson. He's like Thomas Jefferson. MBS,
absolutely,
yeah.
Thomas
absolutely.
Jefferson, absolutely. I mean,
no difference.
When a journalist who works at the Washington Post and such places that gets cut up to pieces by his guards, well, of course, he knew nothing about this. He was entirely innocent of any involvement. And that's why, of course, his key and his government and his country are invited to a democracy summit where he's going to explain to us what true democracy is.
Democracy summit. What a joke this is. It's just bad theater. Let me go to locals, and I'm in locals right now. Let me see what people are saying here. I wonder if Leafy Bug says, I wonder if the MI6 needs to be coerced by the CIA in the way Alexander describes. I think these forces are perfectly happy to cooperate, and they have a common enemy in the likes of Assange. I think the coercion occurs when the MI6 powers that be lean on the so-called independent judiciary to deliver justice that aligns with their interests and that of their American colleagues. I am sure all of the Five Eyes intelligence communities are in furious agreement about matters like Assange.
That is entirely correct. I mean, actually, that's a very good correction to my previous point. I mean, the previous question was, how does the US put pressure on Britain? And I gave one example. But in this particular case, the intelligence services are incredibly supportive. I mean, they're every bit as antagonistic to Assange in Britain as they are in the United States. I mean, the deep state in Britain is a branch of the deep state, the interagency in the United States. So, and we must understand that. And as for interactions between the British authorities, the intelligence community, and the rest with the British judiciary, well, of course, you always hear people say officially that never happens. And as I often like to say, if you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you.
Yeah. Let's see. Otto M says there are no nations. There's only Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock. That's what we're fighting for.
Well, indeed,
so that
absolutely.
Vanguard, State Street, and BlackRock don't run the world.
Yeah,
I agree with that sentiment as well. And let me see if there's any other comments here, Alexander, to pull out. Um, I think we got everything.
Everything. Well,
Oh no, wait, one more
yeah.
from that's worrisome. Duran says, true, there's always hope. In prima luce, at first light, we will act because it's always darkest before the dawn.
I agree. And I think that's exactly the sentiment to feel. I mean, we mustn't forget, that we've this battle to preserve liberty, to preserve democracy in the United States, to defend, the rights the Constitution does give. I mean, it's one that is being fought all the time. The concerted attack this time is incredibly strong, but I still feel in the end that it will fail, because I still feel that the attempt to organize society in a completely different way is too much against people's traditions and DNAs and ultimately interests to succeed. So we should never lose hope. The people who will lose will be the other side. But in the meantime, it's difficult to forget that man in the prison in Belmarsh, his life ebbing away, separated from his wife-to-be and their children, who are growing up without their father, even though, as I said, he has committed no crime, that he's serving a sentence for in Britain, where he's been held in prison by a British court.
All right, we got two final super chats here on Greece.
Oh.
Interestingly enough, that just came in. Reach says, why doesn't Greece get away from Western influence? Has a more of center point of Eastern and Western cultures. Its achievements are valid everywhere. Greece is, I'll just say, Greece is completely captured by NATO and the United States. Completely full from top to bottom.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that. I mean, can I just say, Mitsotakis, our prime minister, was in Moscow the other day. I had a very, very friendly meeting with Putin. And, the Russians always have this feeling they want to be friends with Greece. But of course, it's the Greeks always who disappoint them. If Greece really wanted to play the kind of policy that you're talking about, it could do so. It has potentially very good relations with Russia, potentially very good relations with the other great powers, with China, with India, with all sorts of places, with the Arab world. They never do it because it's exactly the reason that Alex gave. They are the elite is completely captured ultimately by neocon thinking. I firmly believe that Greece should have good relations with the United States too. But the way it's shaped out in Greece today, it's neocon thinking there always seems to prevail. I don't know whether Alex wants to add anything.
Neocon, neoliberal, and I just want to say that it's on the left, on the center, on the right. It makes zero difference in Greece what government is in power.
Absolutely.
They're completely captured by this type of thinking.
I entirely agree.
Yeah. We got some more super chats here. Where am I? Here we go. Hunger says, one way of seeing that Assange case is that Assange was a media hero exposing the Pentagon and phony wars. But once he exposed the embassy cables, he crossed the State Department. Those are our real elites.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree. And the embassy cables, by the way, were in some ways more interesting than the war crimes ones, the cables that the information that he got from Chelsea Manning, which he published, which exposed all the war crimes in Iraq. I mean, the embassy cables are absolutely fascinating. One of the most interesting things about them is what they revealed, for example, about the rise of Vladimir Putin in Russia, and the fact that all the oligarchs were turning up at the US embassy, lobbying for NATO to extend even further into Eastern Europe, and for the US to help them to get the candidate that they wanted for the Russian presidency, who was the then foreign minister, Igor Ivanov, made president in order to prevent Putin becoming president. I mean, things of that kind. Of course, you don't really read much about that, but there was a huge amount in those embassy cables. And there are mine of information which future historians are going to work through in future years.
Yeah. Oh, here's the other Greek super chat, Greek question super chat. I forgot here from Divine Insurgent, which says this may be a little off topic, but what are your predictions for the future of Greek-Turkish diplomacy and relations?
I think a lot depends on what happens in Turkey now. I mean, there's some signs that Erdogan's position is cracking. I mean, if we have a more stable partner in Turkey, perhaps things could stabilize. I mean, Greek-Turkish relations have gone through periods of relative, even, I won't say friendship, but fairly, peaceful periods, alternating with very tough periods. But for the moment, with Erdogan there, it's unpredictable and very dangerous. I don't know what Alex has to add to this.
Yeah, I think now with the position of Erdogan, not much is really being considered with regards to Greece and Turkey right now. Yeah. But you can't really solve the Greek-Turkish issue without solving the Cyprus problem either. So
no, I mean that's the essential
extremely
key.
Complicated.
Absolutely, that's the key.
Yeah.
It could be done.
It could be done. If there's will
there were
on both
goodwill,
sides,
there were goodwill and
sides,
sense. It could be done.
Yeah. Rich says that Greece can do a lot of business with China and Russia, and many Eastern nations keep close friends in Serbia and Russia. They are the true fratelli di Grecia.
Well, it's not true, but of course, I mean, Greece with Russia, when it comes to Russia, it supports EU sanctions against Russia. So, I mean, I remember going to Russia, and you started to see Greek agricultural products, which were pretty good at, feta cheese, Greek honey, all those sorts of things starting to appear quite a lot in Russian shops. And, there's a rather good Greek company, or rather it was Greek in those days. I think it's now Spanish owned, called Apivita, for example, which does all kinds of.
It's Greek company, but now it's owned by
Spain. But in those days it was still Greek, and they were doing they do all kinds of honey-based products, which are very, very high quality. I mean, and had real potential. And I actually came across an outlet in Moscow where they were on sale, and of course the sanctions came, and they all disappeared. I mean, it just vanished. And it was Greece voted for that and supports it and continues to do so. So, I mean, it's very difficult for them to play that sort of game whilst they carry on with those kind of pro-EU policies.
Greece can't do anything. It's 350 billion in debt for the past 15 years to the European Union, to the banks and to the EU. Now it's to the EU thanks to Merkel. But Greece can't do anything. They're completely just captured for the next 100 years too.
I agree.
Because that debt is just sitting on top of them.
Yeah.
It's not going away. Yeah.
I agree. I can't add to anything to that. I mean, I completely agree.
Yeah. We got one last question here. It's from Hakmao. Is there a role for unofficial tribunals in international law, such as the Uyghur Tribunal that recently concluded that China is guilty of genocide just in time for the Olympic diplomatic boycott, or is it a form of propaganda theater?
It's a straightforward form of propaganda. I mean, international tribunals and courts of that nature, I mean, they cannot be set up unilaterally by one group of countries in the way that kind of court is. There is the International Criminal Court in The Hague, which is bound in theory by the Rome Statute, and which a country like China can only be prosecuted in following a referral by the UN Security Council. Now, China obviously has a veto on the UN Security Council, so in theory that shouldn't happen. But at least the International Criminal Court is the product of a treaty in which all of these countries are part. But other courts, these sort of courts that you've just been talking about, courts that are set up in this kind of way and which carry out this kind of judgment, they are part of the international lawfare that goes on nowadays, the attempt to create this rules-based international order based on American values or Western values, the value of which we've just seen with the Assange case, and it's essentially propaganda. It's all about putting China in a difficult position diplomatically.
Yeah. A super chat from Chris of Carthage says the US and UK are symbiotic, neither is subservient.
I think that was true at one time. I think the balance has changed. I think in the early part of the 20th century, Britain was definitely the dominant force. Then there was a time when they were sort of equal. Now I'm afraid I think it's the United States is very much the
Even though I will make the argument that the real money, the real old money is still in the City of London.
I agree with that. I completely agree with yes. That is.
That's if you want the old money, the powerful old money. It's
old money. Yeah,
it's in the City of London for sure.
That's certainly true. And I'm sorry to say this, and I say this perhaps a little bit against myself, but Americans, in my experience, are far too impressed by people with Oxbridge accents. That does still seem to have a strange kind of effect. Look at the effect of someone like Christopher Steele, for example.
Yeah. Alan Watson says, what about the Egyptian-Russian naval exercises in the East Med?
Yeah, isn't it a good example of how Russia has friends all over the world? Europe, of course, is a problem. The US is a problem. But in every other place, the Russians are making more and more, winning more and more friends. Russian-Egyptian exercises. Who are those directed against? Well, implicitly, to be straightforward about this, they're a warning shot towards Erdogan, and Egypt being, of course, opposed to Erdogan's policies in Syria and Libya, and Russia supporting Egypt on those issues.
Yeah. Heyman's super chat says we're run by a bunch of Alcibiades.
He was the Athenian general who smashed the Herms in Athens and set the scene for the disastrous defeat of Athens in the Peloponnesian War. Brilliantly discussed by Thucydides. Yeah. Well,
it's not done. Only good for internal fights and maintaining power through self-delusion and denial.
I think there's a lot of truth in that point. I think you're absolutely right on every point, except one, which is that I think Alcibiades, for all his gigantic flaws, was a far more substantial figure than the Ursula von der Leyens and the invisible suit in the Oval Office that we have today. So, I mean, he was a character, a disastrous one who, as I said, brought disaster in many of the things he did, but he was a successful general, for example. I mean, he actually won battles. What have these people ever won?
Ursula von der Leyen?
Well, exactly.
Let's see here. A couple more and we'll wrap it up, Alexander. Otto M says, I wouldn't say Assange disrupted intelligence gathering, but he certainly exposed it to the great embarrassment of the surveillance state. And Leafy Bug says, I think the embassy cables are the core reason why Assange is so intensely despised by the US. I see there is a lot to say about this, but I think they're leaking fundamentally disrupted and compromised US intelligence gathering.
I think embassy cables played a big role, but my understanding is that the thing that really infuriated the United States was the Vault 7 revelations, which exposed the kind of toolkit that the CIA has. And what came out from that Yahoo News story of a few months ago was that this caused an absolute, sort of nervous breakdown within the CIA, and all sorts of crazy ideas about kidnapping Assange and sending, sort of Jason Bourne type figures, exactly, to sort of kill him or bring him to the US or whatever it was. I mean, having shootouts with the Russians on the streets of London. I mean, lunatic things like that. So, I mean, it's accumulating problems, but I agree. The embassy cables played a big role.
All right. Great live stream. Terrible news, sad news, but we remain hopeful. Quick thank you to all our awesome moderators. Valiest, great Valiest, the great Reckless Abandon, the great Zariel, the great Cosmic Rain, the great Alan Watson, the great GEC 812. And did I miss anybody? No, I think I got our moderators in the live stream as well. Thank you very much for keeping the chat moving along. And Amrit comes in with the final super chat. If we read about Greece and Asia, it is because of Greek-Asian brotherly relations all up to the Far East. Greece has more in common with the East.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and if you're talking about countries like India, for example, the interaction between Greeks and India goes back millennia, and both learn from each other. Absolutely, no question about this. And I would add China. I was many years ago. I was actually discovered and was very moved to find that China is one of the few countries where in Mandarin the name of our country is Sila, Elas, instead of Greece. They actually called us by the name that we use ourselves. I don't know of any other country that does, by the way.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone in Locals, to the Locals chat. That was an awesome chat going on in Locals, the Duran.locals.com. Thank you to all the super chats, all the questions in the super chats. Thank you to all the questions in the live stream and the comments in the live stream as well. Any quick final thoughts, Alexander, as we sign off and head into the weekend?
A desperately sad day, a tragic day, a day of tragedy, not a day where we should give up hope. The battle goes on. It's a tragic day for Julian Assange, a tragic day for his wife-to-be and his children. I weep for them. I'm really, really desperately sorry for them. I gather Stella Morris has actually, that's Assange's wife-to-be, has published a courageous and defiant statement, and we'll see how things go from here. I do get this remorseless feeling that he's going to go to the United States now, and perhaps the sooner the better for Assange. But we'll see what decisions are made.
Yeah, and that's where we assume you better run. Dropped a super chat that says, check out Eragon's or Erdogan's signature. I'm seeing Eragon. Maybe mean Erdogan. It looks like a man blowing smoke rings, but he's not just blowing smoke rings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure I follow that one. But
I think it's Erdogan. I think it's Erdogan.
I think it's Erdogan.
I'm not sure.
Mean, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, quite. I mean, smoke rings. I mean, in other words, maybe that implies that the things.
The rumor about Erdogan, we've talked about this in videos, Alexander, is that he is ill. That's a rumor. It's just a rumor, but that's what I'm hearing on this side.
He looks exhausted, and he doesn't look well. I mean, to put it mildly, and his behavior is becoming ever more erratic in a way that suggests someone who could be ill. That's all I can say.
The Duran Eragon, Zariel says. I'm not getting it, guys. Eragon. Eragon.
No,
am I missing something?
No, I might be. I mean, is there a character called Eragon? Because is it a dragon?
I'm missing something.
There's a film, isn't there? There's a film called Eragon. But I don't really know very much about Eragon. Yes. So
Help
what's
me
it
out
all
in
about?
The chat.
Yes. Yes. I think there's a film. Called Eragon. Though I don't really know my first
is it
book.
Lord of the Rings?
In the Inheritance? No, it's a book. It's I'm just gone. Eragon is the first book in the Inheritance cycle by American fantasy writer Christopher Paolini, and tells the story of a farm boy named Eragon who finds a mysterious stone in the mountains. The stone is revealed to be a dragon's egg, and a dragon he later names Saphira hatches from it. And then there's a battle between good and evil. And Eragon was the third best-selling children's hardback of 2003. There's obviously a whole literature and culture there which has completely passed me by. My huge apologies to everybody. Now that I have two girls, they will no doubt be telling me before long.
Zariel
all
says
about
it's a
Eragon.
three-part book series.
There you go.
You're in a 3-part book series. Okay.
There you go. So I'm sorry, I missed that one because I'm afraid. Well, one can't read everything, and I'm afraid that one has passed me by. Are there any films on it? I bet there will.
Eragon on a dragon. That's what
On
on
a
which
dragon.
says Aragon
Wow,
on a
okay.
dragon. Okay.
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 Perfect.
Yeah. It's over my head.
Over my head. There
Well,
we go.
let's head into
Sounds
the
a lot more
weekend with that.
positive than some of the things we're hearing, though. Yes, let's
Yeah,
we better move on. We've got things to do, and there's lots. And I should say I will be trying to get in touch with people closer to Assange's legal team than I have at the moment. So we'll see. We'll see
Matthew
whether
says
I'm
my
right.
granddaughters loved the Paolini books. So.
Oh well, there you go. Yeah, I'm sure mine will
Books
too.
worth buying, Alexander.
They will absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for that, everybody. Have a
Everybody.
great weekend. And yeah, let's wait for next week. If you have any more news on what's going on with Assange, Alexander will do some videos.
Indeed. Well, we'll do some videos, and I'll also be putting up information about it as I get more on local.
We have another episode of our history series tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be premiering tomorrow. We also have videos on Merkel, where we say goodbye, a proper send-off to Angela Merkel. And we have some videos on Boris Johnson as well, and how he's completely melting down. So those will go up over the weekend as well. And the Duran.locals.com, Alexander's channel, my channel. You'll find all the links down below. Take care, everybody.